Okay, everybody, hello. This video, these next few videos anyway, we're going to talk about factoring polynomials. Okay. Now, based upon the last quiz, what you guys did, you were able to multiply polynomials. You're able to FOIL polynomials, which are going to be key for the next couple things that we do in terms of factoring. You were able to add and subtract polynomials, state their names, find their degree, those types of things. So now we're going to kind of switch gears, and now we're going to talk about factoring polynomials. Now there's four methods by which you're going to be asked to factor polynomials. Okay, so today's video is going to be talking about just factoring the greatest common factor out of the polynomial. Okay, and there's a couple different things we need to be aware of when we do that. Okay, so these are the four types of factoring that you guys are going to have to be able to do. So number one, which is this video, is going to be factoring out the greatest common factor. Okay. The second type, which will be on the next video, will be trinomial factoring. Okay. And I'm going to put in parentheses where the leading coefficient equals 1, and we'll get more in depth once we get to that video. And the third type of factoring is, again, trinomial factoring, where the leading coefficient is bigger than 1. Okay, but that's going to be after you guys get back from Easter break. Okay, and the fourth type will be what I call factor by grouping, and I like to use the FBG acronym. Okay, factor by grouping. So in today's video, we're just going to be focused on taking out the greatest common factoring and factoring those types of polynomials. Okay, so let's jump into some example problems. Okay, so let's factor. If we took, I said factor out the GCF. Okay, and let's use an example number one. 12x minus 6. Now that would be considered a binomial. We know the degree of this binomial would be 1 because it has one variable, but it has two terms, so this will be a binomial. Okay. Now, so when we talk about factoring, what we're trying to do is what's the biggest factor or number that both of these can be divided by. Okay, and we're going to pull that factor out. So both of these can be, the biggest number that both of these can be divided by evenly would be 6. So if we take a 6 out of both of those terms, okay, we're left with the greatest common factor, which is 6, and whatever we're left after we divide each one of these terms by 6. So 12x divided by 6 would be 2x, and 6 divided by 6 would be 1, but we have this minus, so this would be, minus 1. Okay? Now, how do you know you're right? Well, there's nothing else that you can factor out of this expression other than 1, so 1 would be the greatest common factor of this expression. So you know you're finished there. This would be the greatest common factor that we took out, this 6. And then if we redistributed, we should get the original expression back. So 6 times 2x would give you 12x, and then 6 times negative 1 would give you negative 6. So now we're back to where we started. So basically we're reversing the process you were asked on your last quiz to distribute, correct? Now going forward, you're going to be given kind of the end result, the end expression, and now you're going to be asked to factor it. Okay, so it's going to look like, what would it look like if you were asked to distribute? Okay, that's one example. All right. Okay. Example number 2. Now let's take another one. Let's take how about 15 x to the second plus 25x. Okay. Now again, this is a binomial, right? They're not like terms, so we know we can't add these two together. This has an exponent of 2, that has an exponent of 1, right? So again, the degree of this binomial, right, this whole degree would be 2, because this has the biggest power. Now, let's factor this. Okay, so we're looking for the amount of the biggest, not only number, but in this case, they both have x's in common. The last expression that we did in number 1, they didn't have an x in common. This expression has x's in common. So let's work with the numbers first. So what's the biggest possible number that you can divide 15 and 25 by evenly? The biggest number. So in this case, it would be 5. So if we pull a 5 out of there, okay, that would be part of the greatest common factor, but they also have x's in common. Now, you have to ask yourself, what's the most amount of x's each one of these terms has in common? Well, this has 2 x's because of the exponent. This has 1x because we have a 1 understood there. So the most amount of x's that both of these terms have is 1x. So we're also going to pull an x out, okay, because an x is at least in common. Okay, now if we divide both of these terms, okay, by the greatest common factor, this would be the greatest common factor, 5x. Now, what's left over? So what would it look like if I asked you to distribute? So 15 divided by 5 would be 3. X squared divided by x to the first, and you know from your exponent rules, you subtract those, so you just get x to the first, plus 25 divided by 5 would be 5, and x divided by x, those can cross out. So this would be your completely factored form of the original expression, 15x squared plus 25x. And how do you know you're right? Well, we can redistribute. There's nothing else in common other than 1 between those two. So if we redistribute, and we do this kind of as a check method, we could do this in our head. So 5x times 3x would give us 15x squared, and 5x times positive 5 would give us 25x, and now we're back to where we started. Okay? Remember, factoring is the reverse of multiplying. Factoring is the reverse of multiplying. Okay? Let's do one more example. Example 3. Suppose we had 24x to the third y minus 18x to the second y to the second. Okay. Now again, this is still a binomial. Okay. Matter of fact, let's make this a trinomial. How about plus 6x and y? How about that? Let's make it a trinomial. All right. So I'm asking you to factor this trinomial. Okay. So now let's look at the coefficients first. So we have a 24. Forget about the negative. We have an 18 and a 6. Okay. So ask yourself this question: what's the biggest possible number that you can divide 24, 18, and 6 by evenly? And the answer would be 6. Okay, that would be the biggest number that you can divide all three of those by. So if I pull a 6 out, that would be part of our greatest common factor. All right. And now let's talk about what else do they have in common. Well, they all have x's. Well, what's the most amount of x's they have in common? Well, this has 3, this has 2, and this has 1. So the most amount that they have in common would be 1x. Okay, would be 1x. That's the most amount they have in common. So that would be an x. Now let's talk about the y's. They all have a y variable. So we have to pull pull that out and include that into our greatest common factor. So this has 1y because an exponent of 1. This has 2y's, and this also has 1. So the greatest number of y's that each one of these terms has in common would only be 1. Even though this has 2, these two only have 1. Okay? So you would take out a y. So 6, so this would be your greatest common factor. That would be your greatest common factor. And now, let's take this greatest common factor and let's divide each one of these. And you can do that. I'm writing this down. You can do this in your head. Let's divide each one of these by 6xy. And that'll tell you what expression is going to be left over. Okay? What expression is going to be left over. So, 24 divided by 6 would be 4. X to the third divided by x would be x squared. And y divided by itself would just cross out. So first term would be 4x squared. Move on to the second term. Minus. Erase this. 18 divided by 6 would be 3. X squared divided by x would be x to the first. Y squared divided by y to the first would be y. Okay? And then finally, plus 6 divided by 6 would be 1. X divided by x would cancel out. Y divided by y would also cancel out. So the final result would be this greatest common factor that we pulled out multiplied by this trinomial. How do you know you're correct? Well, first of all, you can refoil to make sure that after you refoil, you get the original expression that you started with. Okay? And number 2, is there anything else in common sort of inside the parentheses? Is there anything that you can pull out of these 3 terms? And the answer is no. So that's how you know you're correct, that you took, remember, we're talking about the greatest common factor that you have to take out and factor out. Okay? That's the greatest common factor. All right? Any questions on the greatest common factor, please shoot me an email. Your homework will be sent out to you at 8 o'clock prior to your 8 o'clock of the day your class is scheduled with me. So to take a look at that, I'll be sharing the factoring packet with you via email. If any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Okay? Good luck.